Sustainability Manager in office, and it's great to be here and see everyone.
Great. All right, so this is the Equitable Implementation and Accountability Meeting 1 for the Environment Working Group. I'm sharing my screen, and I just want to reorient everyone to this format that we're using with MS Teams. On the first slide, we have, so this was emailed out to you on Thursday. If you have that email and you want to pull up the link to the presentation, or David can put it in the chat. But on the very first slide, we have the link to the meeting slides. We have a link to an agenda if you want to follow along. The equity screening tool that was developed earlier this year, we'll be using that for our activities. So you might want to open that if you have access to this or to another screen. The activity sheet is what we're going to be working on, and we're just going into 2 breakout groups today. So we'll have bigger groups for the conversation and 1 facilitator. So you won't need to be entering anything. We'll just be looking for your great input. But if you would like to open it up on your own screen and kind of follow along or get oriented to it, that link is in there. And then, of course, the feedback survey at the end. That link is also on that first slide. And then the second slide is for Q&A. Again, if you're a city staff and you don't have access to chat, you can put your questions in here, and we can either try to keep an eye on this during the presentation, or we can circle back with you afterwards and follow up on any kind of Q&A. So let me just do a quick check-in. I'm hoping that I'm sharing my screen correctly. I'm not. Okay. So let me try that again. How about now? Yes, okay. Yep. So again, the first slide on the presentation has the links that I just went through. The second slide has the Q&A. And now we will launch into the presentation. Are we good? Any questions? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kyla to kind of introduce the agenda and objectives for today's presentation. If you want to take it, Kyla. You're muted.
That's great. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. As we've already done, we had our introductions for today, but we will also have our ground rules in a second. Throughout this meeting, we will review the impact maps. We're going to use the information from that to assist us in our key concept, which is the implementation framework. And the activity for that today is defining implementation readiness, partners, and next steps and funding mechanisms throughout this process. We'll then leave our breakout rooms and come back together to wrap up and talk about the next steps. As you can see on the slide, our objectives are readiness, equitable next steps, implementation partners, and funding and finance. For our ground rules, we want to make sure everyone is being respectful, present, and that everyone participates, but no one dominates the conversation. We would love to hear back from everyone because I think that we all have unique perspectives here. We want you to be additive and not repetitive. If you can live with something, we will move on. We are going to be open to new ideas. And if we bring a problem, we're also going to bring a solution. We want to make sure we separate people from the actual problem, and we're not going to speak for the community, but we're going to speak for ourselves and for our own experience. We can utilize our Zoom reactions to provide feedback. We agree on something, but want to stay muted. And sometimes conversations can last a little too long. So we're going to implement ELMO, which is enough. Let's move on. And we're going to make space for everyone to have their ideas expressed.
Thank you so much, Kyla. I know we go through these every time, but this is a community-owned process and plan, you know, and end result. So we want to make sure that we really are speaking for ourselves and our own experiences and representing appropriately. So in terms of where we are at the end of the orange circles. We're creating the implementation framework and metrics. So this is really at the heart of what we've been trying to get to all along. It's been a very, iterative process, learning from each stage, learning from you, trying to figure out how to create the most successful and sustainable plan. And so we're excited to share with you all of the different elements that we're going to be working through over the remaining meetings this summer. So we've gone all the way down through the different steps. You've worked with us to define the pathways and the objectives, those long-term aims. We've prioritized the strategies to help us achieve our goals. We're working on those SMARTY actions to get us there by really digging deep into the impacts and looking at how the impacts will lead to more equitable, resilient, and adaptive Richmond. So thank you. I know last month was it was an interesting process for us internally, and so I'm sure it was for you as well. But just so you know, that was really just really helpful because it got at the heart of the impacts that we're trying to define, and those will be brought back out to develop the strategies more sustainably. So those indicators we will be circling back on once we get through the rest of the implementation process. So at this point, we're really looking at how are we going to equitably implement, measure progress, and ensure accountability in this plan. All right, let me move my slides down. So just to remind you, at the last meeting, those impacts, we're looking at, what are the potential impacts of the prioritized strategies and how can those inform the indicators that we'll use to measure success. We took those outputs and incomes to start thinking about how we will equitably implement the plan. And then the actual impacts are what's going to lead to ensuring accountability and transparency. So that just to give you a little bit of an overarching view on how those are being are moving, we're flowing forward with that. So now we're going to talk to you about equitable implementation and accountability framework. These are all the elements that go into that. So I'm just going to kind of go through each of these and then we'll break them down further. But in terms of readiness, that on the top left corner, that is part of the implementation side of the house. And that's looking at what activities are already occurring and what might be needed to get this strategy off the ground. And then the equitable next steps, that's what immediate next steps can we identify to equitably roll out this strategy. For the implementation partners, that's what other departments or community organizations or private entities can assist with the implementation. And then the city steward is something we'll be identifying internally, but what city department is or will be responsible for overseeing the implementation of this strategy. And then the funding and financing mechanisms. What does financing look like for this type of strategy? And then on the accountability side, we're going to be looking at external accountability, which is what mechanisms will be in place to hold the city stewards and implementation partners and our office accountable. So this is what we'll be identifying at the last meeting of the summer. Transparency is how are we publicly communicating and reporting progress. Indicators, again, how are we going to measure progress? The timeline, how can we time the rollout and budgeting of this strategy through 2030? And then the costs, what are the expected costs to implement this strategy? So those ones that are kind of faded out are ones that we'll be working on internally, the timeline, indicators, city steward, and costs. We're certainly, we would appreciate any suggestions, recommendations, advice, of course, but we figured that our time spent with you is most beneficial, really focusing on the other elements of this framework. So for today, we're going to be going over specifically the equitable implementation, and I just defined those components. So readiness, equitable next steps, the implementation partners, and the funding and financing. And then once we get through all of those, like I said, we'll be able to understand what the city steward should be, you know, what city department is or will be responsible for overseeing the implementation of that strategy. Again, this is not an Office of Sustainability owned plan. This is really community owned, interdepartmental, cross-agency, cross-organization, cross-neighborhood. So we really want to identify who those partners are. So in order to identify all of those elements, we're going to be focusing on the strategy subcomponents. So I want to take a minute to explain to you what that is. As you know, at the last meeting, we took a couple meetings ago, when we prioritized the strategies, we rolled up everything that we didn't want to lose, but that might make sense to kind of fold into some overarching strategies. So that meant that we had some larger concepts with some subcomponents under them that were previously, you know, independent strategies rolled up. So some of those are what these subcomponents are coming from. In other cases, when we were doing the impact mapping, you identified some outputs that were directly related to the strategy and could be ways to make it more actionable or smarty. So to ensure that we're developing this actionable implementation plan, we broke it down into those parts. And this is one example of the public-private green space management. So that strategy says, create a comprehensive green space management program. And you have identified 5 subcomponents. So the first one was create public-private partnerships to help the city create, maintain, and manage high-quality parks, green infrastructure, and public open space. The second one is create a privately owned public space program. Third, conduct an impact assessment of invasive species and create a plan for control and minimization. The fourth subcomponent is to validate and implement recommendations from the mayor's green team. And then the fifth one, create a citywide definition of quality green space that provides guidance on these and other strategies. Now, you all know what all that means way better than I do. You're the ones that came up with that. You know that that's really important. These elements are priorities. And so now this is your opportunity to help develop how to make them smarty. So in terms of readiness, what we'll be looking at for each of those strategies is asking the question, what is the most appropriate readiness category for this subcomponent? So what's the status of it? If it's ongoing or already underway, that means that, just like it says, implementation for the strategy has started. We get to check the box that it's already on the go. The second one is ready to go, and that means that all the ducks are in a row. It hasn't started, but it's ready to go. The third one, it's aligned for implementation, means that it aligns with another city plan and will be implemented through that plan. So if you're aware of, Richmond 300 or some other parks plan or something that you're familiar with that this aligns directly with, we want to note that here. And then the fourth one is requires city action. So maybe there's a policy change that needs to be incorporated into this subcomponent at the city level, or some kind of local ordinance that has to be passed. And then the final one is that it requires state action. We really can't get any further until the state action on this is completed. Any questions on that piece of it before I move forward? Okay, and There may be a case where it's a couple of them or it's somewhere between the two, and your facilitator in the breakout activity will make note of that for you. The next one is the equitable next steps. So the first part of this is determining how and where the strategy is implemented. So what are 1 to 3 key next steps? We're not creating the whole plan for each of these subcomponents, but what are 1 to 3 key next steps to get that task force or whatever it is going in the right direction? And then once we identify those 1 to 3 key next steps, take a look back and think, okay, now what are the major equity gaps or disparities that this strategy could address? And a great way to think a little more deeply about that is to open the equity screening tool. I think the link to that is also in the chat. And that is something that you guys participated in the development of, and it was finalized through the roundtable. And it really asks some great questions to get us thinking in the right direction. So there's the example at the top, and then it goes through all of it's 3 pages. It's a 3-page document. It goes through the community priorities, and it asks priority considerations and additional considerations. So once you think about which 1 or 2 of those, or however many, the most important ones that need to be considered, that strategy could address those equity gaps, we want to then think, okay, how can we equitably prioritize the rollout of this strategy? So maybe it has something to do with using the Climate Equity Index. What kind of data layers need to be incorporated into prioritizing where the strategy goes, or what kind of community group, or what kind of communication outlet, be thinking about all those elements that we've been discussing all along, all of those priorities, and add your thoughts there. So that's the equitable next steps. Let me see if I missed anything I wanted to tell you about that. You have the link to the tool. And then the next one is the implementation partners. Okay, so this is where we're thinking about who needs to be involved in the implementation of this strategy in order for it to be successful. This is not a laundry list of every single person or organization that might want to have a say in it. These are the ones that are really essential to getting it done. So think decision makers, departments, who's financing it, all those questions that would really identify who needs to be included in this short list of stakeholders and decision makers. So who could benefit from the success of this action is another way of thinking about who might be able to add some context to the implementation. How do we include the members of our frontline communities that have been underrepresented or historically excluded from the planning process in the past? So those are the kinds of questions you'll be thinking about when identifying those partners. And it's broken down in the activity under city departments, private sector, community organizations, and equity partners. And as we said before, the city steward, if you have a thought that you want us to highlight, we can make note of that. Otherwise, we'll be figuring that out later. And then the final element that we'll be identifying today is this funding and financing mechanisms and pathway maps. So this is something that we have identified that's been used for other climate action plans, and it's been really successful. It's a great tool to use to figure out how, because there are so many elements involved in funding these different all these different strategies and subcomponents. So we're going to be building this out for all of our strategies, and they're very complicated. But for those of you who like this kind of thing and would like to participate in some ongoing efforts, we are looking for volunteers to help us build this out between now and the end of the year. So please contact me or anyone else on our team to volunteer. we're building out the frameworks for them. You can see this is an example of one. So we've taken the impervious surface reduction strategy subcomponent and identified that in order to complete that strategy, we will need to look for some grants or partners, and some top funding and financing pathways might be nonprofit organizations or non-Department of Public Work entities. And a couple that were identified are Virginia Outdoors Foundation and local landscape companies. And then we found some case examples from California and Oregon. So that's just, kind of a framework example. And then another one is the Urban Agriculture Program, identified that could come through grants or budget requests through city planning, CIP planning, and then maybe some foundation grants, such as Partners for Places, with some case examples for us to look to. So we really need you with your expertise and your experience to help us think through, what kinds of examples can we capture? What kinds of grants exist out there? Where have you seen this successful elsewhere? Where could we learn from? We really want to start capturing that level of detail at this point. Let's see. So as you're thinking through those pathways, just wanted to go over what the different mechanisms are, again, to kind of spur some thought here. So they're a way to pay for the strategy implementation. And the key questions you'll want to ask are, will this strategy be supported by municipal budgeting? And if so, how? What grants or partnerships or other funding sources are you aware of? Are there any existing local programs already going on that could be aligned with or expanded to include this subcomponent? What are some successful similar funding examples? And then some definitions of the different mechanisms that we've identified. Grants, that definition is the repayment-free capital from federal, state, or private funding sources. Partnerships includes resources and capital from non-governmental and corporate actors. That spreads the risk across multiple entities. The loans are upfront capital whose principal and interest must be repaid. Bonds, dependable, predictable financing for large infrastructure projects. Budget, money from the city's general fund. That's what we're talking about when we say budget. And then taxes and fees are new sources of revenue through the city. And then special, if you have other suggestions for special financing arrangements, such as lease purchasing agreements or on-bill financing, community shared equity. These are just some examples to kind of get you thinking. But the transition to a net zero resilient Richmond can't be funded entirely by local property taxpayers. It's just not possible. So we really need to identify those creative and innovative approaches and strategic investments by both public and private sectors. So in this activity, staff took a stab at identifying which ones we thought were mostly capital intensive, and then which ones are more programmatic. And that just means maybe it needs some staff resources or time, education, incentives, and policy initiatives. So again, what is the funding source? Is it a city budget? Is it external funders? Is it partners? What's the financing category? Should we focus on taxes or user fees or investments or grants? Maybe there are several options for each of them, but we want to capture that. And then the financing types that we just went over. So those are the elements of financing and funding mechanisms that the kind of level that we're going for in this conversation today. So before I launch into the activity, does anyone have any questions at this point?
Dawn, all of our strategies are currently for 2035, not 2050. Is that right?
2030. They're for 2030.
Okay, 2030. 9 years. Got it. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, good question. So the activity is going to develop and define those key implementation components that we just walked through. We're going to go into 2 breakout rooms. So we're going to divide everyone up into 2 groups. And we're suggesting 40 minutes per strategy, but really you have maybe 8 to 10 subcomponents to walk through. So your facilitator is going to try to keep an eye on the clock and make sure that we get through all of those. We're not going to be able to get through all of the environment strategies and subcomponents today, so we're going to break this over this meeting and the next one. So again, what activities are already occurring and what's the subcomponent's general readiness for implementation. Then the second you'll walk through and we'll do one subcomponent at a time going across all of these. The second one is what are 1 to 3 key next steps, taking equity into consideration, who can assist with implementing, and then what does financing look like? So that's what we're walking through as a group. And just to show you what it looks like. So it's a spreadsheet, and this is an example. We took this subcomponent about create a citywide definition of quality green space that provides guidance on these and other strategies, which includes information on the types of spaces that provide co-benefits for extreme heat and flooding resilience. So that was the subcomponent. We took along notes and comments and feedback from previous meetings and from the community, the April engagement period. We had some comments on that Conveo document. So we tried to capture them here for you as maybe some helpful thoughts. Some of the different comments that came through on this definition subcomponent were that the definition of quality green space should be developed via community partnerships. It creates a foundation for other environmental justice work. It contributes to legislation and other initiatives. And some of that was also captured during the impact mapping. So we wanted to make sure that we were pulling in the different comments and elements that might be helpful for further consideration as we're identifying those next steps. So, so everything in blue on the spreadsheet is stuff that we're putting out there to help you with this activity. And then there was some relevant legislation that might want to be considered. House Bill 520, it directs the DEQ to convene a stakeholder advisory group for the purpose of studying the planting or preservation of trees as an urban land cover type and as a stormwater best management practice. So when you're coming up with your definition, maybe that's something that should be referenced. And then House Bill 2042 gives the locality the ability to sometimes exceed general requirements in its tree replacement and conservation ordinances. So they're not necessarily direct related, but it might be something that you would consider. Again, you guys are the experts on this, so we'll be counting on you to let us know what needs to be considered and what doesn't. So is this, creating a definition, is it already happening? We thought maybe it's just ready to go, ready for someone to jump on board and figure out how to get it off the floor. So ready to go was the category that we checked here. For the equitable next steps part of the activity, we thought maybe the first step would be to determine if there is a definition of quality green space in the Virginia State Code. Then we thought, okay, maybe then the next step would be to research and publish those code benefits to really get at, the right, to identify the right code benefits. The third one is then you achieve community buy-in. So some task force might come up with a much more comprehensive plan than that, but we thought these would be the first 3 key next steps as an example. So then we said, okay, what are the major equity gaps and disparities that this strategy could address? Well, in that case, and in terms of achieving community buy-in, it's really important to make sure that we are using the right language and that education is a part of that definition and that it provides an objective list or understanding of what should be in those different spaces and standardized. So then how do we prioritize that rollout? Well, we share the definition using diverse media and languages. So that's just an example of how that strategy can address the equity gaps that we've identified previously.
Hi, hey Dawn, it's
Hi.
Rob. I'm curious. So we've had some conversation, and I'm not sure if you were here in the earliest iterations of conversations that we've had, but I'm sort of the notion of community buy-in and education. These are concepts that we've sort of talked a little bit about, and that in some ways we're trying to do it in the other way from an equity focused perspective. In other words, what does the community know? I'm having some trouble as we're talking through this about, like, I'm an expert and that's great, and some other folks here are experts and that's great, but if we're defining green space, I think it's important that we're clear that where communities think it's important for green space to be and what that means to them is a huge part of what, at least for me, an equitable sustainability project needs to be. So I'm just sitting here feeling a little bit like we're tending a little dangerously towards the experts making decisions. And I think part of what we're here to do is to provide our expertise to buttress the decision making and the needs that communities have identified. Okay. Now, if that's already in place, and we're great, but as I hear us talking right now about defining what green space looks like, and then trying to get community buy-in, and then doing education.
Okay, so let me stop you.
Yeah, I'm not done. Actually, I'm not done talking.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, great. That feels a little bit off, so I just kind of wanted to flag that and make sure. And I'm also wondering, sort of when. And again, I wasn't able to be here last time, so I'm probably catching up, and that's great. But like, when's the next time that we're going to go out and check what we're doing with folks in the community? And now I'm done talking. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. So were you here for the presentation part, or did you just join us?
I've been here since 10 minutes past 1, so I don't know which part I have been or not been for.
Okay, so at this point, this is just an example of the activity that we're about to start. And so what you just raised is a great point, that as we're going through the activity, figuring out what those next steps should be to make sure that it's equitable. We're not defining the actual plan. We're just trying to make sure that the key next steps incorporate equity in them. So I'm sure that there are better ones than this example has identified. And then, of course, the Environmental Justice Roundtable and the community group have their own strategies on how to then go back and put a lens on all of the communication rollouts. So maybe Alicia or Kendra or someone else from the staff would be able to add to that response.
Well, hi, this is Monica.
Hi.
And hi. I would like to register that I truly do appreciate Rob's comment, because I'm feeling the same way about this whole plan. There's been a great effort for equitable input in terms of us participating in this plan, but what I don't see in the plan is communities, is a rollout for community engagement, other than here's the plan and we'd like your input. And I think that is a traditional mode of operation that we should consider as we are assessing equitable next steps. So of course we're working towards this plan, but I would like everybody to look in that lens and seriously consider Rob's comment, because I totally agree with it. Thank you.
So this is Alicia. So I want to thank Rob and Monica for your comments. And this is exactly why we have our working groups, and exactly why we're so appreciative that you all are part of this process and taking your time to give us your feedback and your input. So first, just want to, I think we have two separate issues that I'm hearing. One is with this particular example that we shared, and this was something that our staff came up with. And so this is just totally starting point. Feel free to get rid of it all and start all over with this one particular example. And so Rob, your comments are very well taken, and love for you to whoever is going to be working on this particular strategy and subcomponent to, clean slate and start all over. Just to give you all some context, our team, as always, is preparing for these working groups, and we have a whole lot of work that is put into all of this to what you all see. And so this was just one piece of a lot of work that our team did. In no way is that an excuse at all, but just want to say that we could have spent a lot more time on this, and we weren't able to do that. So we really appreciate your feedback and your comments on this. And I think the other piece too on the example, that it was trying to come up with the implementation for just the definition of the green space, not how green space selection and location in the community would be taking place. So I think if that's helpful at all. And then on the separate piece of the Monica and Rob, your comments on the overall plan itself and community involvement, outreach, engagement. I believe Kendra, who is our community engagement coordinator for the office, is here with us today. And I'd like to ask her if she could respond and just share some of the plans that she's currently working on and will be working towards with our outreach and engagement efforts related to the plan. Kendra, would you be able to do that?
So some of the things that we're looking at for the summer is just having a lot of one-on-one conversation and trying to build out partnerships with some of our organizations in the 6th, 7th, 9th, 8th, and 9th district to start this conversation on what this looks like in implementation period. So that is something that is in the works right now.
Thank you, Kendra. We have a fellow from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network that's working with Kendra this summer, that's helping build those engagement plans out, and actually will be probably reaching out to a lot of you soon to see if that's something that you all are interested in helping with, or at least giving us some suggestions on. I know another piece that Kendra is working on is some youth engagement activities around the plan. And really what we're doing is, and Kendra is leading all of this work, is trying to do a lot of pre-work and continuing to build the relationships with the frontline communities in the city. And this is all will be leading up to the next, big engagement period, which will be next April. And so we had our engagement this past April. And so we will be going out again as far as a big blitz for community engagement in April next year when we have a draft plan. But we will be touching and reaching out to the community, and that's what Kendra's work is, all throughout, between now and April. And so, and the reason for that, and again, Kendra, please, I'd love for you to speak in more detail on this, is the feedback that we got from the very folks who were trying to reach is that that we needed to do a lot more work before just putting out another version or the draft plan when it's ready, that we had a lot of work to do between then and now. And so that's what we're focusing on with a lot more of this targeted outreach and smaller, more direct engagement efforts.
Thank you, Alicia. And also I'd like to comment to Kendra, and the team, in consideration of outreach, that April is probably one of the worst months to do outreach in some areas, because it's not, people are not yet engaged with the outdoors. And so it's very difficult to reach people, especially this last time during COVID. But I would encourage a reconsideration of outreach strategies. And Kendra and I think have already had some conversation in terms of the city's typical partners in doing outreach. So yeah, thank you.
And I guess, I mean, my couple of responses, Alicia. The first is definitions sort of matter, and so I think, you know, starting at the state code is lovely, but we're building a plan for the city of Richmond, and I think it's really important that we know and are putting in what the residents in the neighborhoods that we're trying to plan for think is quality, right? And I'm not beating, I am actually beating up on this particular slide because it's in front of us now, but I'm beating up on it because I think it's important that that's the frame that we're bringing to the work, right? Is we go find something, but then how do we make it meaningful for the people that we're planning for? And that may or may not be what's in the state code, right? It could be, that'd be lovely, right? I mean, if it's that fine, but let's double check, number one. And number two, I'm scratching my head and I don't have an answer, but I mean, what I'm hearing you say is there's two people, right? One, folks are over engaged and undercompensated for that engagement, right? I mean, we've seen that time and time and time again, where folks are feeling like we're, you know, researchers and everybody else is coming and they're asking stuff and they never come back and they never give us data, and, you know, we're a little bit tired of it. So I don't know if that's a piece of what you're getting back from some of the engagement stuff, but there's so much going on in this space. And I get that Brianne's out, you know, on maternity leave, and you know, she's a big piece of this process. And I get that you all are small and mighty, but it feels like to go from April to April without, you know, and maybe I'm just, you know, Kendra, I'm not trying to sell you short, but you know, without like consistent touchbacks around the work, just and maybe I'm just getting your blitz thing sideways. I'll stop talking now, but it just feels like a long time, April to April, without like. Anyhow, I'll stop.
All right, well received. Thank you for that. Hopefully this activity will be able to kind of circle back on the order of things. And so, like Alicia said, this one example about the definitions, we can throw it out the window and we can completely start somewhere else. But the next piece of this activity is identifying, where is it? The implementation partners. So maybe that's where we start, you know, who needs to be involved in that definition. And that's where you really identify, you know, not just city departments and organizations and any potential private sectors, but which equity partners need to be part of that, or which neighborhoods, or whoever you know of. So this is just one angle on it. It doesn't mean this is the only place that we're going to be identifying it, but these are your strategies. So based on your experience, where do you think we should start? Then on the community side of it, the community priorities and the public engagement side of it, there's a whole other list of strategies that are going to get at those same elements of equity gaps. So I see a hand up. I'm not sure who that is. I don't see full name. Hi.
Hi. I just want to interject a little bit. So when we're talking about defining green space and what green space means, and every definition I've ever seen, it kind of makes it sound like a small park. It's an area that is set aside with grass, trees, and vegetation, an area that's set aside for recreation and for beauty. So I'm just, I've been coming to these meetings from the very start, and I really want to know where street trees fit in at all, because every single meeting, there seems to be zero discussion of trees just existing in a streetscape. Everything seems focused on creating a community of trees somewhere within I don't know what the outside of the green space is. Is it a sterile concrete environment? I mean, is a treescape even part of this plan? And we go into breakout rooms where we're talking, we're giving our opinions and our point of view on things that we really, really have a lot of pre-existing scientific data that we should be referring to, instead of just discussing it amongst ourselves when we may not have anybody in the breakout room who has any particular expertise in what we're discussing. So I really want to see us refer to known science, because there's tons and tons of it that's relevant to Green 2050. And also, if we're dependent on community input, we should also be wary that speaking for urban forestry, some of the areas where we have identified heat islands and areas that have the fewest trees of anywhere else in the city, we find the community is extremely tree averse. They have a very, very adversarial relationship with trees. They could have the only mature oak tree within 4 surrounding blocks, and they ask us twice, 3 times a year to remove that tree because they're scared of it. And a lot of this is driven by their financial situations. That's probably an elderly person on a fixed income, and all they're thinking about is the times they saw on the news a tree fell and destroyed somebody's house. And that house is their only form of wealth that they own. It's the only thing they own outright. And that a lot of them associate trees with horrible outcomes for them. They are not aware of any tree benefits. They are only aware of liabilities and risk, and trees are a scary thing to them, and they want the trees gone. So they're not appreciating how they are personally impacted by a lack of trees. They are fighting to get trees removed because they see it as an inconvenience, and they have to use very, very limited resources to, for example, clean their gutters or get the leaves off of their property to maintain a neat appearance. Just imagine a single woman aged 87 trying to rake her leaves or mow her grass or just maintain a tidy yard. So we have problems in areas where trees are very lacking, and people do not want trees. They fight us if we try to go into the neighborhood to plant trees. They fight us if we say their tree is healthy and we can't remove it. It's protected by an ordinance, that sort of thing. So just a couple of things to unpack there on my chest, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak.
Sure. Thank you, Janine. Those are excellent points. And I think that those are the kinds of details that we want to capture today. So under the next steps, when you were referring to the definition of street trees and where does this fall, asking that question or bringing up that data resource, that might be a very first step. So identify those key next steps to set these strategies up for success. These are not exhaustive lists of next steps. These are 1 to 3 key next steps. And then in terms of the implementation partners, you want to make sure that exactly the types of people you were talking about that are involved in the decision making are identified. And I see a question in the chat, what's the difference between the community organization and an equity partner? Well, what we found, first, we just had city departments, community organizations, and private sector. But as we went through those community organizations, we recognized that they weren't necessarily meeting the equity gaps by getting those people involved in the conversation. So maybe we needed to also specifically call out the equity partners and get it. So this is just a framework to get this working group thinking in this direction. So again, this is a very iterative process. We're learning as we go. Your input, this very valuable input, is what's making this plan better as we go. So does anyone else want to respond to the statements? The floor is open. Okay, well then let's keep moving here. This is, what the spreadsheet looks like in the activity. We have the implementation partners, and then we'll walk through those funding and financing mechanisms with those questions that your facilitator will capture. So this is just, really want you to be thinking about brainstorming these responses so that we can capture all of this great feedback that you're giving us and record it. So the two strategies, or the four strategies that we're going through today, I'll be covering the public-private green space management and the urban and community agriculture. We'll just get through as many as we can. And then Kyle is going to go over the Parks Master Plan and the urban forest and green space planning, all the subcomponents that fall under those strategies. So if you have access to this slide and you want to type your name under the sign up, go for it, or staff can do that for you if you'd rather just call it out. It's 1:55, so at 2 o'clock we will go into those breakout rooms and we'll have about 50 minutes to get through as much as we can. So go ahead and take a break if you've already put your name in there, or call it out and we can add it in. And then, like I said, in 4 minutes, we'll shoot you into your breakout room. And if you can't access it, and you'd like us to type your name in, just call it out.
I would like to go into Kalia's group.
And this is who's speaking?
This is Janine.
Okay.
This is Bryce. I would like to go in Kyla's group too, please.
Monica to Dawn's group, please.
If you don't have a preference, then Kyla will just even out the groups.
Dawn, we swap next time, right? So we all get a chance to do these ones, not like our last meeting.
Great question. We have a lot to get through, so we're probably going to have to add a third meeting to the summer and hope to get through them. After today's discussion, I think we probably need to revisit that.
So this probably won't be a one-stop shop where you are stuck in one but never get to visit the other.
Yeah, what would be preferable is that between now and say the next meeting, you go back in yourself and add to it.
Gotcha.
But as staff, we haven't figured that out yet. Okay. But you will
Sounds good.
definitely be able to contribute in some way, whether it's in a breakout activity or independently. I
Okay.
promise.
Cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll be right back in 2 minutes. All right, so Kyla will be sending you into breakouts, and we'll see you back in 50 minutes.
I just need a little more time.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'm sending you all out into breakout rooms now.
All right, thanks, Kyla.
All right, hello everybody. Does everyone have access to the slide deck and to the activity?
I believe so.
All right.
Hi, Kyla.
How do I get to it?
There's a inside the chat feature, there is a link that David put in. I think he just put another one in there. Thank you, David. And so we are looking at objective 1.2. So in this spreadsheet, sorry, everything's moving very slow for me. At the bottom, there's a tab that says objective 1.2, and we will start there for the Parks Master Plan. I do want to give you all free range to start with this where you feel would be most beneficial. So if you feel that if from our previous conversation that identifying some partners may be the most beneficial part of this, then please feel free to do so by starting there. But if not, we can just kind of go through each subcomponent of this Parks Master Plan strategy and try to look at what our readiness and everything else is. Do you all have a preference? I will be taking the notes, so you all feel free to just have a discussion, conversation, and I'll try to capture everything as quickly as possible. But I will ask that there is a minor pause between one person's thought and the other person's so that I can mentally capture everything.
I'm having some trouble navigating this spreadsheet.
Okay.
I mean, it's small. It's kind of difficult for me to read, and I don't know where I'm supposed to be reading.
Okay, so of course I can't see your screen, but are you able to see the tabs at the bottom of the spreadsheet?
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Do you see 1.2 and from
Yeah.
there? Okay, perfect.
Hey, Kalia.
Yes, it's Kyla.
Sorry. Sorry, I had another meeting. I just joined in. So is this is this one of the breakout rooms? Is there a need to balance things, or is this? I'm happy to go to another breakout room too.
Well, it's only 2 breakout rooms. I will let you know what the other topic is, and you can decide whether or not you would like to stay here or go there. The other breakout room will be discussing public and private green space management and urban and community agriculture. This one is around parks, master plan, and urban forest and green space planning. So if you want to go to the other one, I can shoot you over there.
Sure, happy to be wherever. Do both sound fine.
All right, so either one is fine with you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll leave you with us. Less work for me. All right. Are y'all ready to get started? All right, so our first up component is to support the development and funding and implementation of Parks Master Plan, providing all Richmonders access to the quality public parks that meet the surrounding community priorities within a 5-minute walk, bike, or bus ride. Prioritize locations based on a set of factors co-created with the community. And some of the notes for that is more trails, shuttles, and bus lines to parks. I guess in this example, they've already put an aligned space here, but if you all feel that that should change, if I'm not mistaken, that's something that can be adjusted. Is that correct, David, for the readiness? You're muted, sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, this is just another team or example that the team have put together. So like the one we shared on the slideshow, feel free to overlay your opinions on top of that. Aligned in this case means that another city department is already in the process of putting together a parks master plan. And so rather than develop our own, the idea for this strategy would be to support the development of that plan and make sure that RVA green priorities are incorporated.
Are there any objections to this being aligned, or do you feel like there should be something else? If not, we'll move on to the next portion.
No objection.
All right, sounds good. Do you all feel that there is any legislation that may be helpful for us to consider in this process? I am going to assume that that silence means no. Is that okay to assume, everyone? All right. So then we're gonna look.
Kyla, it's Bryce. Sorry, I might be missing that. Where did you just read that from?
From objective 1.2 in the spreadsheet, the Google spreadsheet that was in the group chat or in the chat. Yeah.
It was under 1.2, and then in what area of 1.2?
So subcomponent 1. And then if you look into column I, the relevant legislation that may be helpful to consider.
Oh, yep, I got you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Well, and thank you for saying something, because I will call out which column I'm looking at as well, because I think that will probably be helpful for everyone. So if there are no suggestions for legislation, we'll move on to column J, which is our equitable next steps. So what we're going to try to do is look at 1 to 3 next steps that we can take equitably to implement the strategy of having more green spaces around the parks, 5-minute walks. So one of the things that was suggested from the office was to identify responsible agencies and to ensure RVA green priorities are integrated into what is currently the Parks Master Plan. Are there any objections or suggestions for additions or subtractions from these things? And if there is another next step, I'm definitely open and willing to add that as well.
Where would identifying potential spaces for new parks or inventorying existing parks or reaching out to the community to hear their ideas go and next steps?
I think that could definitely go into into this space where we're not only identifying responsible agencies, but identifying what the community wants for parks in their spaces. If you all agree with that? And I put in here what they consider quality green spaces, so it incorporates their opinion of what a green space is as well. Are you all okay with that, or should I take that out? All right.
I think that makes sense.
Say that again. It's too small. I can't read it.
You can't read it. So there is actually, I think there should be a space where you can zoom in. I'm trying to identify where that is.
Sometimes you can hit Control+ to make
the words bigger.
Yeah.
Bigger.
You may have to have the whole Google Doc.
Yeah, mine is actually pretty large right now. So I'm like, I don't even know what I did to make it like this, but.
In the top where all the options are, right under, it says like File, Edit, View, Insert. Right under Insert, there's it says 100% under mine. And you can click on it and expand it to like 125% or 150%. That'll zoom in for you as well.
It's under Insert?
Yeah, so.
Not if you click Insert, but like on the.
Yeah, in the toolbar, there's a like an undo, redo, the print, paint format, and then right beside it is a percentage of the.
I'm going to have to shelf this for a minute because my boss is calling. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, I have another question or comment or thought, and I don't know where these kind of things go. So where is the opportunity? I think about creativity and learning from others, like, and it's probably not a 1 to 3 next step, but just wondering about like looking at other municipalities that do these things well and going out to visit them, or not even having staff folks do that, or folks, you know, organizations, but actually community members. I'm just thinking about, like, is there more to a master plan than sort of, what's the word, like making an inventory of parks and green spaces and planning for the future? Like, where's the creativity? Where's the going above and beyond just what we know to something beyond that?
So I'm thinking to place it in a space where we have the identifying responsible agency. We could also identify other municipalities who have successfully done this, and maybe developing partnerships with them, or like just having some learning experience from them in here? Does that work for you?
Yeah, I think one of it is learning from others, and some of it is like trying to see, you know, I don't want to say it's necessarily an equity thing, but often we see and can envision only what we've experienced or seen. So how do we create a process that helps to see beyond sort of our own social location on what is good green space and otherwise?
Can you repeat the last part of what you said? Because I want to make sure I capture everything.
Maybe. I'm also trying to keep up. Are you typing somewhere? Sorry.
Yes, I'm actually typing in the very first point where it says identify responsible agency, and then I have identify other municipalities that have successfully developed Parks Master Plan and develop creative opportunities to learn and collaborate.
Okay. I can't, I'm sorry. That sounds good.
Okay, if you think of anything, like, feel free to let me know, or to, shoot me an email or something. I can just add it.
I'm not sure if this is the best place for this, or if it's later down in creating a plan to introduce Richmonders to say. I don't think so. I think it's here, right? Because in column C, they talk about more trails, shuttles, and bus lines to the parks. And it seems to me that that's an area where there's always a lot of, there's one approach where you kind of make the trails and bus lines and shuttle routes and hope that people follow them. Or there is the idea of, like, you build things, you don't put down any sidewalks, you see where the people walk, and by the grass starts to wear away along this, and then you put the paths and trails and sidewalks kind of there where people like know where to go. People are like telling you where they want to go to connect different elements. And so it seems like a step, not just in identifying the green spaces, but how to connect those green spaces should be kind of community centered.
Yes, I agree. All right, I'm gonna just add as much of this as I can into, and then we'll just figure it out later. That's my my perspective on this, as far as like where it goes and how it gets cleaned up. So I'm just going to add a nice little fourth bullet that says identify where So I have identifying where communities want to commute via trail. And I want to encompass what you said about the infrastructure, and then like just kind of seeing where things are worn out. Is I just want to make sure I'm capturing it correctly.
It's probably a correlate to 3, where identify where communities would like to have quality public green spaces. It has to do with how they would like to make the connections between those green spaces.
And how they would like to. All right. All right, are there any more suggestions for these next steps or additional components that we can add to it? All right, if not, we're going to move on to the next component of equitable next steps, which is what are the major equity gaps, disparities that this strategy could address. So for the first one, we have identifying responsible agencies and identifying other municipalities that have successfully developed parks master plans and developed creative opportunities to learn and collaborate. In what ways could this address some of those major equity gaps and disparities?
So Kyla, just to jump in, rather than try to fill in every box here, I think they want to just at a high level, if this strategy, if this like subcomponent has addressed any equity gaps. So I guess another way to think of it, if there's no parks master plan implemented, what equity gaps may widen, for example. So I think they have here like, because frontline communities tend to have lower access to green space, without a parks master plan, that may get worse, or trees may be inequitably sited, for example. And so I don't think we probably need one for each of these steps, just for time, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So, I mean, I guess in this process, because there is so much, do we want to just kind of, I don't know, allow people to, from what we have with our next steps, like if there is something that they may be able to see in one of these, like they just call it out versus me going through each of these steps?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question for the folks on the call. Like now that we've done part of this first one, I guess what would be the best way to finish out for you all? Is it going step by step helpful, or like sort of what Kyla suggested, just sort of talking through whatever you have and we'll put it in where you talk, or is that what you're asking, Kyla?
Yes.
If 3 o'clock is our time, or around that time, yeah, we may not be able to do it step by step. I think we should know which one we're on, and then hopefully we can orderly jump in and fill in some of the boxes that we have there.
All right. So I guess with that being said, we're just going to look at column K and L really quickly for the first subcomponent. And if you have anything you want to provide feedback on, please feel free to do so. If you want to go ahead and look ahead to some partnerships and just let me know what partnerships you may want to add into here, feel free to do that as well. But let's take the next 5 to 10 minutes to try to brainstorm those things, and I'll fill them in as you all call them out. All right, are there anything that anyone want to add to column K or L? All right, if not, we're going to go ahead and move on to city departments that may have some city departments, community organizations, private sectors, and equity partners outside of PNR, which is, I believe, is Parks and Recs, and the Friends of James River Park, DQ, and Community Virginia Community Voice. If there are any other partnerships that you think we should take into consideration for the implementation of this strategy, please provide those at this time.
When it comes to city departments, putting in DPW and DPU as well, just because a lot of our parks are co-managed by the different departments, whether they're a park or something else. So I would think those in planning, of course, if it's a master plan. And I think with the community groups, I would just say, in general, you can just say Friends of Parks groups, not specifically Friends of James River, because I think we've got close to like 40 throughout all of Parks and Recreation.
Anyone in the private sector or other equity partners?
Well, I was trying to decide if this goes here or under 4 when we're talking about tailoring things to ability, but also accessibility. I think it goes both places as organizations like Sportable, or some of our Sportable Richmond would be one, and broader than that would be under community organizations, any of the kind of youth or organizations that tend to utilize park space. Of course, I can't off the top of my head. Well, I was thinking like Riverside Outfitters might be a community organization, although they might fall under private sector, but thinking about folks that access the space too.
Yeah, I would put ecotourism / camps as part of the private sector partners, and GRTC needs to fit in here somewhere too.
You said ecotourism and what else?
I just said camps, but
okay.
We can just go with ecotourism, and that can kind of capture that part.
I'd add the camps just for some of the people who are not as
familiar.
Wouldn't hear that.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then it was one after you said ecotourism and camps, you said another.
It's a GRTC if we're looking at being able to connect. I'm not sure if that should go under a government, private, they're kind of a hybrid type.
Yeah, I'm just gonna put it down and they can move it wherever they want later, as my opinion, as long as we capture our thoughts. And I just want to make sure it was Sportable Richmond. Okay, perfect. All right, we can move, or are there any other suggestions before we move on to the next funding and financing portion? All right, so moving on for funding and financing, some of the staff that worked on this for this activity identified this as a capital intensive project. Do you all agree with that, or do you feel like it is programmatic? If you do feel it is programmatic, we can make the adjustment here. But some of the questions that we want you to take into consideration for this next column, R through U, is what does creative and strategic financing for the subcomponent actually look like? So if there is some municipal budgeting that's necessary, want to add some of that information in there. If there are any grants or some successful similar funding opportunities, and if it aligns with some other programs, this is a great place to put any of that information. So I'll let you all brainstorm for a couple minutes. Give like 2 or 3 minutes. And if there is something that you want to say within that time frame, just feel free to blurt it out and I'll put it down.
I just had a question. It's Peter. You said that a parks department, or sorry, a parks plan was already being developed, and our objectives would be sort of aligned with that. Who would be developing the plan?
Yeah, so I believe there's a Parks Master Plan already in development.
Is it by the city?
I do believe it's by the city.
Okay.
If anybody else is aware of that answer, feel free to jump in and provide that.
This is Bryce from Parks and Rec. It's in our goals and plans to do an overall Parks Master Plan. We do have the Downtown Riverfront Plan, which kind of impacts a lot of plans around the river. We have the James River Park Master Plan. We have a Pump House Park master plan, and then some of our other individual smaller parks also have master plans, but a bigger coordinated effort is really needed for the entire city. And it comes to trails and greenways, our connectivity. You know, the James River Park master plan was amazing and went through a lot of community input and can be used as kind of our a template as to do it, because that went to every district in the city. We did pop-up events, all that good stuff. And it does start to impact larger parts than just along the river, but we still need a little bit more coordination for an overall master plan of parks. It would take some funding, obviously, and more community input. But yeah, I think it would be a parks initiative, but with a lot of support from the different communities.
Okay. Thank you.
So Bryce, have you already had this conversation about what are the other potential sources of funding to kind of make that happen relative to this?
Yes and no. I'm not sure what there are certainly grants that we've tried to get, and certain partnerships would include some private grants that we've gone after. But yeah, I think we're still looking at it as kind of a capital improvement, or not a capital improvement, some larger influx of funding for our park, our park system overall. So we haven't quite narrowed it down yet, if that's what you're asking, Todd.
But you could use the funding for the, like, for example, for the James River Park System Master Plan as what's column U? What are some successful similar funding examples? You could. How was that funded again?
That was through Friends of James River, and they privately raised the funding for it through a variety of people and businesses.
And how was the riverfront plan funded? You know, that was a while back.
It was before my time, but I believe that was a city initiative through planning, maybe venture, maybe someone here knows.
So whenever this actually happens, it would be sort of a shared partnership. It wouldn't just be James River Parks or just the city that would facilitate the whole planning process.
Somebody would have to head it up, and I would say Parks and Recreation would be the group that heads it up.
Okay.
As for the funding part of it, yeah, hopefully city sponsored.
Okay.
That conversation maybe, I mean, you said it, Bryce. I wonder if somewhere on here in terms of partners or funding needs to be an organization like Venture Richmond or even Plan RVA, who's regional, but still may have connections they can make to funding sources.
Is Venture Richmond private?
Kind of a hybrid.
Okay.
But yeah, under the column T, are there any existing local programs that could be aligned? We could look to how the James River Park Master Plan was funded, or I guess that's similar funding examples.
Okay. You said James River Master Plan.
Yeah, I would say that is a similar example. We could look at that as one way, but not sure if that's the best way or not for a citywide one.
And the riverfront plan, I think, would be another one to put there.
Yep.
All right.
Are there,
Go ahead.
this is maybe too much of a stretch, but grants, partnerships, or funding sources, are there economic development grants at a local or statewide level? Because a parks master plan and a well-planned park system improves economic health. Would that be another source for a master plan funding?
I can definitely add it. Yeah, grants. It was grants for eco. Can you repeat it?
Well, just economic development.
Okay.
Is there anything under economic development that would help support funding a master plan? And if not funding, implementing?
All right. So we literally have 9 minutes left. Clearly, this is a very time-intensive process, which is completely okay. But while we are here, would you all like to look at the second subcomponent of this and identify some next steps for that? Remember the subcomponents can be found in column B. Number 2 is where we are. Oh, and also, sorry, because I completely did not move over enough, to identify what the actual readiness status is for something like the second subcomponent. All opinions are welcome.
And there's creating a permanent volunteer partnership position. Is that what we're talking about right now?
It's creating a permanent office position within the parks, under Department of Parks and Recreation and Community Facilities to manage the partnerships and volunteer programs.
So Bryce, nothing like that exists right now. I'm trying to get a sense of where we are as a baseline.
Kind of. We have a north side and south side volunteer coordinator, Giles Garrison, Matt Mason. And, you know, my position does a decent amount of community partnering. So ongoing, yeah.
Okay.
How does this relate to the overall strategy? Yeah.
Well, the overall strategy is the Parks Master Plan, which is that wanting to support the development and funding of implementation of the of a Parks Master Plan. So I guess essentially whatever is being developed within a Parks Master Plan, being able to identify things that are important within RVA Green 2050 to collaborate with that, with whatever organization, Parks and Rec, if they're heading it up, to ensure that we're not duplicating any efforts. But I guess since the Parks Master Plan doesn't actually fully exist currently, this is just future thoughts and plans for when it comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And so is a key
Alright.
next step, is a key next step, sorry, Kylie, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you go ahead, go ahead.
I was just wondering if a key next step is there like, I don't know, expansion of that position right now, or I don't know, or what would be a next step? Yeah, ideal world.
Well, I
I'm,
think one. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Bryce.
It already somewhat exists, I would say, if it's ongoing. I don't know if expansion would be the word, maybe focus or something along those lines of the duties. Because right now in parks, you kind of juggle a few different things or wear multiple hats. So more of a focus on that, on the actual partnership and volunteer programs versus splitting time amongst multiple things.
Yeah, right. Seems like you're all pulled so many different ways. Like having dedicated, would be one. One possible direction to go. Have somebody this is all what they do and only what they do, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So additional funding might be needed. That could be like a next step. So you could actually fund a position for a new person to be brought on board, or someone to move into that role.
Yeah, you can put something along those lines. If we need to start moving with K, would something along the lines of like language barriers be something that we would try to be addressing here? Just because we're a city of many languages, but most of our volunteer type stuff is going out in English. So is that appropriate in this location?
Absolutely.
And then of course, so yeah, I guess that would almost be like the job duty of that person would be being able to work with Office of Multicultural Affairs or something like that to make sure that we are reaching multiple groups. But I think that captures it enough right there.
I want to just add that. Add that into the equitably prioritizing the rollout of the strategy. So.
Okay.
All right. If we want to move on to column M, looking at some city departments, I'm going to go ahead and add the Office of Multicultural Affairs. Makes sense. Are there any other city departments that we would like to utilize as partners? If
I
not,
think that's
we
good.
yeah, we can think about some community, private, and equity partnerships as well. If you think of anything, just let me know which category you would like me to place it under.
Virginia Community Voice could be considered an equity partner. They have a big Spanish speaking component.
Sorry, I did not mean to raise my hand. All right. Are there any other partnerships? If not, we're going to move on to whether we believe this is capital intensive or we're actually at time as well. But while I'm going to bring the other people in or close their breakout room. And if we want to add any other information about whether or not this is capital intensive and what the budget situation looks like, feel free to do so. All right. Well, with that being said, and we're at almost at time, or at time, we'll just try to work on this a little bit more the next go around. Thank you all so much for your participation in this. I know it's a lot, but thank you.
Thanks, Kyla.
No problems. Nice to see you, Peter.
Good to see you too.
Shelley, are you all set for Thursday for some routes?
Yeah, I'm excited. Maybe not when I have to get up at 5 o'clock, but I'm excited. I hope my kids are. I need to refix the form. I think my son will go with me one time in the afternoon and my daughter in the evening and then my husband in the morning. But yeah, I'm excited. I think it'll be fun.
Thank you. I'm making my daughter come with me too.
Yeah.
Hi. Are we all back? I think so. How did that go? We had a small group in mine, but amazing conversations. Really, really helpful. It looks like Kyla has her hand raised.
Yeah, that was an accident.
Oh, I was gonna say, just speak up. All right. So how about some feedback? Now that we've kind of circled back, what do you guys have to say about that? Speechless.
I'll say that I feel uncomfortable signing other groups up to do work.
So just to make sure everyone understands, we are not setting anything in stone. We are not signing anyone up. This is really just, we've all been talking about all of these strategies for months, and there have been lots of conversations, and we just want to capture these important elements. So, I know that there's a lot of that we want to be so sensitive about our intentions and, what we're putting out there. And this really is just a starting place. Does anyone else want to speak to that?
I just want to say, but Jen, thank you for raising that. And so that's something we'll take forward into the rest of the meetings this week. And so one, just us communicating more clearly to everyone in the working groups that really this is like brainstorming sessions. And so by asking you all to share with us possible implementation partners, that does in no way connote on our end that we're attaching responsibility to anything. This is just step one of a much longer process. And so that's really what this is. And so I think you're sharing that concern is one, thank you for doing that. And that's really helpful for us just to understand that we have some work to do on how we're communicating this.
Yeah, I got that, like, they can say no. I guess I feel like I'm shouting out some groups, other people in my groups are shouting out groups, and I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know my other group suggestions. So I feel like we're making this list that might not be comprehensive, but it's certainly more than just my one brain. And I think if I got the email from y'all that I need your help so that we can implement RVA Green 2050, I'd feel compelled, and I feel weird about making other people feel compelled.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And maybe, I know this is, supposed to be a transparent process, but maybe that's something that does not get circulated to the public. Without first, of course, the interest is to make sure that we are able to capture as many people as we can who are involved. And like you said, we don't know everybody who's involved. And that's the point. So I don't think we should put anything out to the public that we are not, that hasn't been vetted with the public.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I agree with Monica, because I certainly named some organizations that I haven't called and said, hey, would you be interested? Also, because not my job to do that. But I also understood that to be bringing people to the table or providing an invitation for people who aren't part of the conversation. So that's just another way to look at it, particularly around equity issues. In this case, around accessibility and people who may know better about how accessible or not the park and green space experience is. So, but I would agree with Monica, like I would feel awful if we published that in a public document and that organization was like, you never talked to me. So I would be careful about sharing things like that publicly, but finding a way to include those folks on the list for future calls is important.
Absolutely. Very well said. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. That was just really, really helpful for us. Our next meeting is going to be August 2nd, and Brianne will be back. And then we are going to schedule a second meeting in August. So you'll be getting that invitation for Monday, August 23rd, to finish up these strategies. So, always want to hear how we can do better. Thank you for all of your very honest and constructive feedback. Much appreciated on behalf of our team. The survey link is in the chat. It's also on the first slide of the presentation. If you have any updates that you want to share, please do so. You can either put that in the Q&A and we'll share it with the rest of the group, or you can call it out now or put it in the chat. Otherwise, thank you again for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.